Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. We have Pat Bridges, somebody who wears a lot of hats in snowboarding. I'm not even going to say which one you're doing these days. I'll let you kind of say that. How you doing, man? Good to have you on.
I'm doing very well. I just got back from Mammoth 2 days ago, and I had spent almost a month up there just riding and working on some stuff. So I'm doing good. Yeah, getting ready for the summer. I got a busy summer coming up, but yeah, no, I'm doing very well, and I'm excited that it looks like there's a lot of things going on you know, that are indicators that, at least part of, if not a lot of the pandemic is in the rearview mirror.
Thank the heavens that we're heading in that direction. What were you doing at Mammoth?
Well, we got a spot up there for the month of May. We are working on just working on stories and stuff like that, filming some stuff, working on covering some stuff that was happening up there.
And who is the crew? Is it like Eddie Wall and Danny Cass riding there?
No, no. Well, you're close. Let's say 50-50. Yeah, I mean, a couple of those days we're out filming with Danny Cass, but
No
no,
way. Sick.
yeah, no, Eddie I didn't catch up with Eddie at Mammoth. I mean, I saw Eddie at an event at Bear in the beginning of March, hand plant contest, but no, Danny definitely was there, and so much so that he went to Switzerland right after we rode, and I actually gave him a board to take with him and stuff. But yeah, no, that's been, yeah, it's funny you say that. Like Danny is somebody I've known since he was like 13 years old, and we used to travel a lot together. And I mean, I went to summer half pipe jam at Tyrell Basin with him in 2001. Um, but yeah, the last year, like I got to spend a week with him up in Mount Hood last summer, and saw him a couple times here and there, and then just spent a bunch of days with him up in Mammoth. And yeah, Danny's crushing it right now. He's in a really good place and doing really cool things. And it's interesting is so now he coaches predominantly, and I've seen him
I've
with
heard.
he coaches, and he also coaches Corel Castellet. And it was funny, we were at the Red Bull Recharge, involved in that. And Danny'd be like, "Oh, I'll catch up with you in a second. I gotta go talk to Corel about something," because she was competing in it and stuff. And it's funny to see him on the other side of it and taking it so seriously, particularly since the coaching thing, as far as Danny is concerned, is something that he never really took to. Like when he had a coach when he was in high school going to Okemo Mountain School, I think it was all a means to an end. I mean, that was kind of like, mandatory that you had to deal with a coach as much as like, you have to deal with teachers when you're in high school. But I don't really recall him ever finding the benefits of a coach for him.
I did not think of his snowboarding when I was a kid. Danny was my first favorite snowboarder growing up, and I never really thought of him as like an athlete per se. You know what I mean? I was like, that dude is fucking sick, and he's doing everything. He was doing everything right as far as I was concerned when I was a kid. I was like, that guy is the sickest. Bottom of the pipe. There was like an old grenade ad, and he had like a actual army helmet, and he had like his kind of gloves in this fisheye photo that I had on the wall. And I was like, I want to snowboard like that, dude.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you look at the canon of snowboarding, and I mean, there's different layers of style. I mean, there's the superficial overt trappings of style, which is like what you wear, what you ride, what you do. And then there's like the innate style of just, somebody who does something better than anybody else and does it the way that people want to see it done. And it went from like Kidwell to Brushy. Um, and then it was like, let's say Ingemar or some of Ingemar's contemporaries, and then it went right to Danny. And Danny was that guy. There are others, Marco, some other, giggy other people later on, Nicholas, that just kind of ooze style and
Yeah.
stuff. But in the post Y2K era, none of them had the charisma or, the proper style or just the nonchalance and innate ability to do it as good as Danny.
Yeah, snowboarding really had like especially in contest riding in the early 2000s, had like a distinct look. And once Danny was blowing up, and yeah, he was just fucking sick. The grenade stuff was really sick too, because it was like, if you, as being a young kid from Winnipeg, I was so drawn into like that brand in particular. And I feel like he just put off a certain energy and vibe with that company. It was like a really good win-win. Like the company was so sick, and then Danny was so sick that it just like,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like skateboarding or culture in general, what they were able to do with Grenade, and I'm so lucky to have had a front row seat for a lot of it and to have been, gotten to be spend a lot of time as a part of that. But you look at like, these entities that were that just caught lightning in the bottle were bound to implode. You look at the Sex Pistols, their run was only like a year and a half, 2 years. And then you look at like Bones Brigade, Plan B, all these, paradigm shifts, and these people who come together to change the game. And Grenade kind of did that and stuff. And Grenade had an amazing run. And everybody talks about Danny, but I mean, talk about a deep bench, because there were like 4 or 5 other next level high profile riders that in some ways were better than Danny on a lot of things. Obviously, there's Travis Rice. He's the first generation right out of the nucleus of Grenade. And then you've got Eddie Wall, you got Kyle
Kyle
Clancy.
Clancy, yeah.
Yeah, and you got Hannah Beeman, and then there's Danny, and there's several others too. But those 5 kind of were cutting edge, and I also think Andreas got on Grenade pretty early on too. Andreas Vig.
It seemed like everybody was repping it though. Like every one of the dopest AMs and pros at that time, it seemed like everybody was just repping that shit. You look at all the videos from like 2004 to 2007. It just seemed like lots of people were just like, they just were down to support it.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they could, I mean, you had people like, obviously, and I should mention, I mean, the list is endless, with people like Flood and all that. But yeah, I mean, till, like Forum and Burton, clipped like Travis Kennedy and Pat Moore were all up in the mix and stuff. And
Yeah.
the list keeps going, Colin Langlois. I mean, yeah, everybody did. And it was cool because it had been a while since something like that happened in snowboarding that we could call our own. I mean, I guess Forum was, a little bit before that, and they had a similar effect, obviously, if not a bigger effect with the Forum 8.
For sure. What do you think? There's a brand that's similar to Grenade and Forum right now?
Brand wise, I mean, from a brand team perspective, and it's a totally different game, I think the closest is like a Vans, I'd say, has that.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the closest thing. I mean, as far as like board companies, I think the board company that has like a dense team that has the deepest bench is still probably like Solomon. Solomon's really top heavy. They've got some stunners. Whether you look at like Bodie, I mean, obviously Bodie and Grenier, they've been around for a while and stuff, but you got kids like Fava coming up. But I think there's a lot of crews that are, there's always been crews that are similar to the Grenade crew, sure, they're not as, you know, um, pivotal, and they're not necessarily changing the game the way that Grenade did and stuff. But I mean, you got like Dustbox. I mean, even you guys up in Canada, Man Boys, you guys have a lot of influence, and you guys got a lot of personality, and you guys roll deep. But I mean, it's a different sport and
Yeah.
stuff. And with social media and everything, a lot of stuff is very every person is their own outlet. Every person is their own quote unquote brand, so to speak. And it's hard to elevate a crew like that, like you used to be able to, because you've got so many different touch points that are personality centric for each individual person. They're all siloed, as opposed to everybody coming together, which is where Dustbox coming together, making their videos and stuff like that is it's resonant.
I kind of hate this era for that, because it used to be like a marketing team would market Grenade, or a marketing team would market Forum and make it dope. And now, as a kid that's coming up, you have to be your own marketer, which is like never really been in the hands of the individual. It's like normally the snowboarder's job is just to snowboard. And then like, the brand is like, if you collaborate with dope brands, they just like kind of like find an image for you and then market you. I mean, there's definitely two sides to that coin. One kind of being like a brand forcing you to be somebody you don't want to be, which hopefully you're riding for the right company so that doesn't happen. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. It would suck to be like an introvert kid right now. I think of like Scott Brown, who was filming for Absinthe for a while there. He was on Flow back in the day. He's on Dope now, but like one of the most talented snowboarders I've ridden with. And he just didn't play the social media card. And I feel like it just like had such a profound effect on his career, because he just didn't, that's just not what he was good at. He was good at snowboarding, really good at snowboarding, but he just didn't play the social media game, which is like, it sucks for kids that don't do that, to especially if they don't live like somewhere in the States, to get that like opportunity, because you have to like be this social person these days, which
Yeah, I mean, before 2010, you didn't have to be a personality to be a pro snowboarder. But now, you've got to put yourself out there a couple times a day on social media in a very it's not, well, I mean, I guess one way to look at it is braggadocio, like you're claiming, you're
yeah,
claiming
that's the weirdest
on.
thing, because
And
it's so counterintuitive to what snowboarding is, you know what I mean? Like it was always like, your actions speak louder than words, and you would never like talk about yourself being the best. And like now it's like all about just, I don't know, I'm guilty of it, like posting shit of yourself seems so weird, like, hey, check me out. It's so like, but I mean, I get it, it's part of the game, but like, I don't know.
well, that's what they say. Don't hate the player, hate the game. But yeah, but you know what I'm saying is, like, before 10 years ago, there was, I mean, granted, if you were a real asshole, nobody wanted to go out and shoot with you, and nobody wanted to go out and film with you, and nobody wanted to go have you on their team. But you didn't have to put yourself out there like that. You could be an introvert. You could be somebody who's, just a unique, just not really, putting themselves out there. And as long as you were riding at a top level, you'd get what you deserved. And now it's just much more of there's a tapestry of things you have to do that just are new, and it is what it is. I mean, we all, as much as we can lament, the challenges of social media, we all benefit from it.
Yeah.
The question is, in the long run, do we benefit as much as, does it help us as much as it hurts us? Who knows? I mean, it's all still new. We're all still getting the beta on that. But yeah, I mean, but and then even then, if somebody was an asshole 20 years ago, but they were an amazing snowboarder, the bigger the asshole you were, the better you had to be at snowboarding to
Sean Palmer.
keep going. Yeah, but also he broke through the ether. Like when we were talking about Danny Cass, Sean Palmer had a ton of style, but I don't think Palmer's style, while he was strapped in, while it was amazing and it was some of the best, it wasn't the best. But when you added in his bravado, and you added in his confidence, and how he was no filter, and he was a bit of a antagonist, and it was, some of it was contrived. He would probably show up at a situation and say, hey, what would Sean Palmer do right now? What would Sean Palmer
Exactly.
say? And there was Palmer the person and Palmer the persona, and where one ended and where one began, who knows?
The same for Scotty Whitlake. I almost feel like he was a fucking genius with his career. He was like, this is like, he was
Well,
smart.
it's funny you say that. No, like, um I don't know how much people talk about it now, but I mean, he was widely regarded as, very, very, very highly intelligent. He was somebody who was, when, I mean, back then, you were a part-time snowboarder till you became pro. You know, you held a job or you went to school or you went to college, and he was taking all the advanced classes and stuff. So I mean, he was I mean, Danny Cass too, very smart. And Danny also, I think, played up the persona quite a bit. But I remember the first time I met Whitlake was in 1995. I was working at the Village Store in Government Camp, and he uh he had a buddy Dave, and they used to just ghetto surf, and they just sit there and ride through all the camp zones that got abandoned. You got to think there were 6 camps on Timberline at the time, and once they hit dirt or rocks started popping up, whether it's in the runways or in the pipe, predominantly the pipe in the 90s, they would abandon that half pipe and move on to a different section. Or if the campers had to hike in to get to the pipe, they'd get a different lane or stuff. So there used to be every camp, there'd be 3 or 4 live half pipes at Timberline all summer long, but there'd also be 4 other half pipes that were like that were scuttled, that were like the remnants of half pipes that had been there
Sick.
4 sessions before. And the more industrious summer poachers, like Whitlake and his buddy Dave and all that, you know, myself, like that's where I met Danny Cass, and with his older brother Matt, we'd like steal salt and go and salt these pipes, you know, take our boards, reshape them, and keep them up, because you know the security to get in and out of the camps was pretty aggressive at the time and stuff. So much so I have friends who were campers, and because they were so good at snowboarding, they would get kicked out of the camp and have to, you know, because they'd be like, "There's no way you're a camper. You're better than the coaches." You know, these are kids from the East Coast. But to that one where the pipe, I met Danny and well, I had known Matt, his older brother, and he introduced me to Danny when Danny was 13 at this time. I remember seeing the whole Rev team, because again, it's Rev snowboards. They're not going to have a lot of access to the camps, though I think they were doing USSTC was one of the camps they had access to. But I remember, you know, Mitch Nelson, Timmy Osler, JP, Walker, JF Pelchat, Jeremy Jones, the whole Rev team filming, probably for Whitey or somebody, or a promo video, just do a train of methods on a highway hit and an abandoned pipe right in front of me. And I was like, these guys are doing something.
That's amazing. Let's go back here a little bit. Where did you grow up? What was childhood like for Pat?
Well, I grew up in Killington, Vermont. It was actually called Sherburne at the time when I was growing up. After I left, they changed the name to Killington because there's another town in Vermont called Shelburne, and all the mail from Sherburne would end up in Shelburne, vice versa. So they actually changed the name of the town to Killington. So I was a townie growing up at Killington, Vermont. It's in central Vermont, and it's just a ski town. You know, it's like Whistler or any place, you know, where the where the company town is revolved around a ski area, and the ski area is the company.
Did you how did you land your first sponsors being from there? Like, were there reps and stuff like that? Because I'm imagining you started snowboarding pretty early, but I do remember hearing at some point that you were like on Rossi and Airwalk, I think. And I was like, how did that come to be?
I don't know. I think did it like a lot of kids. You write a letter, maybe
Yes, the letter.
yeah, maybe sent. I know I wrote a ton of letters, you know, to a lot of people. But it was I competed and stuff. I actually didn't get sponsored really till I was kind of out of the I wasn't competing as much, let's just say. So when I started I competed in the US Open the
No way.
as,
Sick. I didn't know that.
as a junior, which you know they had a division for anybody under 18 or 16, and people like Brushy would do it, and Jay Quinton from like Smoking Snowboards. But I did that, and then I got a chance because I rode with a bunch of friends. You know, there was a kid. The town I grew up in, Killington, there was only one other kid my age in my class, one other boy, there was like 6 girls and 2 boys. It was 8 kids in my class from kindergarten all the way to 6th grade, maybe 1 or 2 more, depending upon who moved to town, left town. Um, but we all started snowboarding right around the same time, 7th grade. So I did the US Open in 7th and 8th grade, did horrible. Um, I mean, I think I got 16th in the moguls.
Sick.
Yeah.
Yes, Pat. Solid. How many people? 17?
No, 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 there were like 80.
Oh, that's solid.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly a lot of them went on to do much better strapped in than I did. But yeah, no, and then there's a regional series called the New England Cup. So I did those for a couple of years with some friends. Some of my best friends actually were from New Jersey. They're the ones who introduced me to snowboarding. Because their family had bought a house. My mom was a real estate agent. And that's a lot of my friends I met through my dad was a manager of a hotel. So I either met him staying at the hotel or they bought vacation homes from my mom. So that it was weird because like obviously there weren't a lot of boys, because we had 300 year-round residents in Killington. So my friends
Wow.
were vacationers, who would come up every weekend. So we all started snowboarding together and we all started competing together. And I wrote a letter. The way I got on Rosignol is they're like, listen, we'll send you a pro form. So I got a pro form. And my first board I got for free from my parents, but the next 3 or 4 boards I got were like pro form boards. um 5 boards, which were like shops had pro forms or friends had connections with shops or yeah. So that's and then so I wrote a letter to Rosnall. They sent me a pro form and they're like, listen, instead of spending, you could buy a board for $150. So I bought a race board, bought some hard boots and bought a freestyle board from them, and $450 later I was off. I was working at the summer at a gas station, convenience store, and then I was a bellhop.
The flow when you first get a discount, my first that was through Academy for me with Kyle Kennedy. I like sent him an email in like 2002 being like, hey, at Academy, do you guys, I love your boards. Do you think I could get a discount? And they were like, sure. I was like, what?
Well,
Save
yeah, I mean,
50%. I was tripping out.
knowing what we know now, and I'm sure it still exists, but it was like they had the inventory. As long as they weren't losing money, they were hitting their minimums. So it was like, um, but actually, my first sponsor was Uvex goggles.
Damn.
Somehow I wrote him a letter and he took me over, he took me down to his basement, which, for a 14-year-old could have been creepy, but
Yeah, totally.
I left with like 8 pairs of goggles and that was my first sponsor. And because of that, I think they had some connection to Rosnall. And Rosnall's like, all right, well, somebody's already vetted this guy. So which happens to this day. I mean, we see riders who ride for a big brand and a high profile brand, a coveted sponsorship, and other people will pile on because they're like, well, if this person rides for that brand, they got to be bringing something to the table.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
you see it with some high profile brands now that dare I say might not be as on the ball, and it creates a ripple effect where our next thing you know, somebody's got all the sponsors in the world, and it's because of that one sponsor that picked them up that everybody thinks that they're at a level they might not be. But yeah, so yeah, that's how I did it. And then the relationship with Rosnall grew, and I left. I was on Rosnall for like 5 years. Stoked. I got to run their house at Hood, worked at the demo center, getting paid and free lift tickets in the summers at Hood, and got ads and got a little bit of travel budget and stuff. So it was cool. And then later on, I got a little bit of travel budget and salary from a couple other companies. So
How did this turn into like when did writing come into play? So for people that don't know, I mean, you've been writing, you've been working at Snowboarder Magazine for forever.
I was more of a realist, and I knew like you know, you know, I've, what was using my mind would probably be a better you know way to go about things. I didn't really, I'm not really a natural athlete. And I mean, I've snowboarded enough to actually, if I sucked at snowboarding, I wouldn't still be putting in the time in it. But I mean, by any means, I had eyes. I could see where the talent lied, and it wasn't in the mirror. But yeah, it's weird. So I went to college at Johnson State, which was close to Stowe. Once the snow fell, my grades fell, so that only lasted a year. And then I went back and I was coaching. I always kind of like wanted to stay connected. I kind of growing up in a ski town at that time in the 80s, you saw people who were successful, buying homes, living a pretty good life, waiting tables, bartending, this, that, and the other thing in the service industry because it was a different time. And yeah, that was kind of like the fabric. It's kind of like the kid, and I mean, granted, it's a very tone deaf analogy, but like somebody in West Virginia growing up in a mining town, you're going to end up in the mines. I was going to end up growing up in Killington in the service industry at the resort, and I was stoked on that, and I was happy with that, and that's how my parents had come up, um, who were both moved to Vermont as ski bums. But yeah, I went to college, then I came back and I coached, and I knew I wasn't maybe I don't know, I was still getting free boards, but I was barely a sponsored rider and stuff. But yeah, I just stayed in the scene. I just stuck with it, and I had done a little writing, like an emotional emo, teenager trying to trying to find his way. Yeah, something about it. My parents were always reading. I always read. It was something that just my style is very conversational. I don't think I'm the best writer, but I'm prolific, um, which is just means you've done the work. But yeah, a friend of mine who I had started competing with, where I'd met competing in like 1989, is named Mark Sullivan, and he had gone
Oh
to
yeah.
college at UVM, and he moved out west and did once Blunt came out and all these other mags, there was a bit of a cottage industry. Snowboarding was exploding in the mid 90s. Mark made a magazine called Player in Summit County, which was like a Blunt light. It had the edgy content, it just didn't have the gloss. And then Mark came back to go to college and continue his education at UVM. And him and I were catching up at Killington one day, and he's like, "Hey, I think I'm going to start a magazine based around East Coast snowboarding because there's 500 companies in snowboarding in 1994, 95." He's like, they would got to advertise somewhere. So I was like, hey, you should call it East Infection Magazine. And he's like, oh, I'll take it into consideration. A couple months later, the first issue of EI came out, and then was like, after a year, he's like, write a couple things. And after I'd written a couple things, he's like, hey, do you want to come in and carry some of the workload and just write full time as an, partner slash editor in East Infection? And we went on tour in the van. Next thing you know, I'm living in Burlington, and it was, it was very, there was no, it was us. Nobody was saying, yes, that's good. Yes, that's bad. I mean, in a way, um, Yeast Infection was like our social media, where it's like, it's on us to put our message. It's
Oh
on
dear.
our message out there, however we want to do it. And yeah, and I mean, a couple times the word, yeah, that's crossing the line. That phrase was probably should have been mentioned a lot more than it was, though. But yeah, but that's how it was. And after we dissolved Yeast Infection, Mark moved out west and started working at Snowboarder, and I kept waiting tables and doing contests here and there. And while I was at Yeast Infection, though, I had always gone to Hood and hit some jumps in the summer and stuff, but there weren't a lot of good jumps on the East Coast. But there were at Hood, and I got pretty used to those. And once jumps started getting good on the East Coast, due to this guy named Dave Alcott, yeah, I just slid right in there, and there started being big air contests on the East Coast, and we had a leg up from lapping that because I wasn't good at the pipe, so I would hit the jumps at Hood, which were empty. Nobody was jumping at Hood in the 90s. They were all just riding the pipe. So I had the jumps to myself. Nobody was kicking me out because nobody cared because there was no crowds at the jumps, and that was able to give me an advantage over everybody else, once big air contests and slope style and jumps got good back east, once all that stuff started to merge and bleed out to New England and that scene, that I did start competing again and doing okay. Um, but the other thing I was doing at the same time is I remember thinking to myself, okay, I like this writing thing. I'm pretty good at it. People seem to, give me opportunities with that. I always thought to myself, well, what would be a good amount like of money if somebody was to pay me full time? What would that equate to? And somehow I landed on $75 a day. And at the time I was getting paid 25 cents a word. So I was like, okay, if I got,
25 cents a word.
yeah, I was like, hey, if I'm going to get paid full time to write, I would have to write 300 words a day. And every day I would write 300 words, whether I was getting paid to do it or not. Kind of like diary style, but a lot of it was sort of pro bono stuff. Like I was writing for Yobi, people like that. And it was the notion of like, that's the skill you would need. I mean, the difference between a freelance writer and a staff writer is freelance writer can sit there and say, yeah, I'll write about that, or I won't write about that, or this is the idea, this is what I want to pitch. But if you're a staff writer, you have to write what needs to be written. So I just would try and write every day, 300 words a day, because that was 25 cents a word, and that was the $75.
Damn.
And that I
75
was waiting,
bucks.
I was waiting tables. Yeah, well, that's the thought, that I would, get paid $500 a week, or whatever.
You mentioned that you were doing some big air contests before big air was kind of the norm. Slopestyle was kind of just breaking on the scene. Who would have been at like some of those events back then? Any like staple household names?
Well, okay, so if you were talking about like the spring loaded at Killington, you'd get people like Trevor Andrews,
What?
Irvin
Sick.
team would come out, but once by later on, you'd have Jesse and Lucas Huffman, people like that competing. And that was just the New England centric stuff. But then when I did the Bud Light Big Air tour and the Grand Prix Big Airs and stuff, it was Borgstead, Michael Chuck, Peter, Kevin, people like that. Joel Mahaffey, I remember competing with Russell at Timberline at like a big air, and Russell was riding a hyper light snowboard and asked me, would bum cigarettes off me and stuff. But it was who you'd expect in the late 90s, particularly with the Grand Prix in starting in December. And I mean, Josh Dirksen did a lot of them, McAllister, Crawford, Engelsman did them all. Parker and I, lapped a bit back then, and like a little bit. And then I had met Peter a couple times over the years, line. Um, First at SIA during the Substance premiere in like 1995, and then later on through Big Airs. And when he guest edited Snowboarder, he called me and asked me to do an interview with someone. So, but yeah, that's it. I mean, Michael Chuck for sure. I mean, everybody, who else were some of the other more?
Who was the standout back then? Like, I mean, obviously,
Oh, 100%. I mean, and then my good friend Jeremy Bay, which everybody should look up, because he had amazing style on the East Coast, and he had some tricks that kind of changed things in big air. But and Nick Frankie was another one, a really aggro dude. But Borgstead, 100%. Borgstead and Peter and people like that. But Peter didn't do like the Bud Lights as much. But Borgstead did every big air he could find, and Borgstead would mop up with the back nine.
how much is the purse these days for like a win? Like
I think
10
like
grand or
5 to 10K. I mean, I got third place at a Grand Prix Big Air once, and it was winner take all. That was the only downside of that. And I actually got fourth place, but Bjorn Linus took his helmet off on the runway and put through it. And it was a Grand Prix in '98, and the FIS was in. So they're like, hey, we looked at the tape. You're supposed to wear a helmet. You're going to get DQ'd, and it bumped me onto the podium, which is nice.
thanks, Bjorn.
I should have gone fourth, but it was Borgstead first, Michael Chuck second, and then I ended up, benefiting from Bjorn's conviction. Well, Bjorn did a lot of big airs back then. Eric did a lot of big airs back then. Marco did some. Oh, you know who else used to just mop with him is Wasdell.
Yes, Kurt.
Kurt, yeah, Kurt was crushing. But that whatever. That was the '90s, and I had 2 tricks, 3 tricks, and you
What were
know,
the tricks?
switchback round ones, cap fives, just nothing too like warm ups, but not even warm ups, like warm ups for an 8-year-old by today's standards, you know?
That's amazing. Yeah, it's true, eh? When did you start at Snowboarder Mag? Like, when did that kind of lock in? You mentioned that Mark Sullivan, a good friend of yours, gave you the opportunity, but when did it all start?
Well, Mark went out in like 97, 2000, you know, Y2K, but also the internet boom. Um, Doug Palladini was the publisher of Snowboarder up to that point, and then he left to start a online platform that was, you know, a balance of like e-com and content. And he took a lot of the staff, like the editor Rob Campbell with him, eventually George Cavallo, the photo editor. And so Mark ascended to editor, and he's like, "Hey, we got to bring in Pat." So that was my ends. And Jeff Baker became photo editor shortly thereafter, and we brought in a guy named Aaron Draplin he had just graduated from the MCAD in Minnesota, which is a design school. We brought in Aaron Draplin. So we were kind of like really wet behind the ears, just kind of outsiders who got a chance to come inside because the staff had been drawn to the .com bubble.
What was like the first meeting? You guys like, all right, we're in charge of this mag, or did you guys feel like you guys knew what you were gonna do and had like a plan, or was it like, holy shit, guys, we have to get this magazine going? Like, it seems like a kind of a rookie group.
Yeah, well, there were a couple things. One, we were kind of lucky at that time. A couple things. One, the internet wasn't really a real time thing back then. A couple of people were. Transworld definitely had a big structure, which they had bought Snowboarding Online and started their web presence then, bought into it. And there were a couple like, you know, like Brooke with Yobi and stuff. But I mean, it was just to upload like a 1 meg file would take you like 3 hours, you know? So it's like, it's just not, and there was, everybody was chasing that. And I remember thinking when I had a couple phone calls from some startups, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to come?" And I was like, "Listen, because I don't have a college degree and stuff." So I was like, if I could get Snowboarder Mag on my resume, then I'm set, you know, or whatever.
100%.
I knew it would be more important than some flybynight.com, which nobody knew at the time they'd be fly by night. But I mean, so anyways, we didn't really know, but so that was like January. So we had from January all the way through to April, because we would do summer issues at the time. And the summer issue was unique in that it was usually a different format than normal mags that started coming out in August. So we kind of had this little bubble to put together a magazine that was almost like a beta, like a test. You know, it didn't have to be you know, we had one issue that was a low stakes issue. It never sold great because it was off season, this, that, and the other thing. So it'd be hard for people to judge whether we were doing good or bad. And nobody really, I mean, you got to think it was just us and Transworld at this point. Blunt had already dipped, and Plow had dipped, Heckler, whatever. So it's us and Transworld. So it's not like, you know, conventional wisdom is if you're number 1 or number 2 in this space, you're doing all right. It's when you're 3, 4, or 5 in the space that you have a challenge. So nobody was paying too much attention, and everybody gave us a lot of breathing room to figure it out. But because we were able to do that summer issue, because had we had the buyer's guide as our very first issue, it would have been, that's high stakes right there, because the buyer's guide was probably the most important, biggest issue of the year. And it had a lot of complicated things, like all the specs for the boards, all the photos for the board. You got to think at this time it was all on slides. But no, we were fortunate. We had done, Mark had done it for 2 years already, so he knew what he was doing. we weren't number one. It's not like, Trans World was number one by a lot. So we had nothing to lose almost. And then in all actuality, it's like everybody was paying attention to and busy getting their with the hype of the .com.
Typically, you open a magazine back then, it's like Burton's first, and the next page is like Volcom, and then Billabong, Vans, whatever. It's like, how much was it to be the first like 2 page?
Might have been 12,000 at one point in Snowboarder. I think spreads were like 6 to 8,000, depending upon where they were. Back cover was probably like 8,000.
And then there would have been how many magazines? Did you guys have, was it 12? You guys didn't have an issue per month, right?
Where no, never 12. Where Snowboarder peaked out, I think it was 11, which is
Okay.
around 2010.
Dang. So if Burton wanted to be let's say for round numbers is $20,000 and there's 11 episodes. Yeah, you're thinking 200K just in advertising in that one magazine.
Well, no, you're thinking, yeah, it's a lot more than that.
Dang.
Back
Okay.
then, Burton used to do 2 spreads in a single, maybe. And then when you break in who at one point, like 2008, who Burton owned, you had a Gravis spread or a Gravis single, but more likely a spread. You had an Anon single or an Anon spread. You had Red, which was a precursor to Anon. You had them. So again, you had Gravis, you had Analog, you had Red, you had Burton, and then you had Forum would have a spread, Foursquare would have a spread, Special Blend would have a spread, Genius would have a spread. So you're talking
Wow.
40, $50,000 an issue.
And how much of a play did that have on the cover of the magazine? You know, if a Burton rider has like a photo and then you have a photo of another guy on a M3 board, does it come and play? Like you're like, well, we should probably give it to the Burton rider because they give more money to the magazine. Like,
No, it doesn't. In some ways, it does. In some ways, it does. If you've got an apples to apples comparison, and this apple says Burton and this apple says M3, there's two things at play. If Burton had to cover the month before, you're going to be like, okay, we don't want to be Groundhog Day, broken records. Let's tip the scales in favor of the non Burton cover, and vice versa. It could go the other way. But that's only if the action isn't commensurate. Like if everything is the exact same, but more often than not, the photos that are the cover photos are going to emerge. The only time that you would ever even, and you would never bring it up before the fact, you'd always bring it up after the fact. Well, that's going to make Burton happy, or that's going to make M3 happy. But the only time on my watch, and this is me, and granted we have a whole team, where I would put my foot down is with the events. Like, hey, this is our marquee event. This is Super Park. We need to have a Super Park cover. And then when it comes to the imagery, I'd definitely be like, well, fuck the photographers who are hiding the banners. We need the logos
yeah.
to get the play. And I definitely played that card. I own it, but those are the only instances. And then it's an imperfect thing with covers too, because sometimes you're thinking, oh, this is a theme issue. We need a cover from Japan. So we're going to run with the Kazoo Curtis cover of Japan, stuff like that. So, I mean, there's no direct science to how you choose a cover. And a lot of times people will be like, I did this and it never ran as a cover. I mean, people write their own narrative and they'll be like, well, of course I didn't get the cover because I wasn't on a Burton and stuff. Well, what if Transworld was had the month before run a photo with the similar composition? What if we were doing a theme issue? What if the photographer had the photo soft? Or what if the photographer never even sent the fucking photo on time for a deadline, which also happened. So, I mean, everybody likes, and I think a lot of people say it because every writer wants themselves to be on the cover of the magazine and every photographer wants it to be their photo. And they lose sight of that bias. So they'll displace the reasons they're why they came up short as far as getting that cover. They'll come up with a myriad of reasons to not look in the mirror and take a critical analysis. Well, maybe it's something that the photographer did, or maybe it's something I did. It's always somebody else causing the strike.
Scapegoat.
Okay, well, and that's just more prevalent than ever now. But and again, if people, outside of my knowledge and purview, did manipulate the cover selection. I wasn't aware of it. Actually, I do have quite the opposite discussion, where there's a lot of times when amazing photos didn't get run because we had run too many certain brand photo, so any
Oh,
brand like
yeah, I understand.
Burn had
Yeah,
too many covers, so they're like, oh, okay,
this guy
sorry,
can't get it.
you're shit out of luck. You can't get your second cover of the year because we have to spread the love. I remember an instance where and I know for a fact other magazines aren't like that. I know for a fact other magazines that did sell their covers. I remember we sent Ryan Hughes, our photo editor, out to Seven Springs, Pennsylvania to shoot or to do a shoot with the Forum team. And Austin Sweeten was there. They had a big stump and they lit it on fire. He did a frontside 3. It's an amazing cover. I'm really hyped on it. Bring it up to Austin. It's probably one of my favorite covers. And it was actually shot by Tim Peer, a Forum photographer. But Ryan Hughes, our photo editor, was there. They both got similar photos. And I remember after that shoot, we're like, man, that's amazing. We probably got a cover out of that. Ryan and Tim both shot amazing. We're stoked we did that shoot. Brian Knox from Forum was like, you can't run it as a cover. As a matter of fact, you can't run it because we're going up to Mammoth in 2 weeks and we're shooting Peter Line doing a hand plant on a flaming log for the Transworld Photo Annual cover. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, we've got this concept with the in-router and we're going to shoot it. And Peter's going to do a hand plant on a flaming stump or something very similar to what they had just done with us at Seven Springs. So I'm like, okay, well, you could pull Tim Pierce photo, but there's no way in hell you can tell us what we can and can't do with Ryan Hughes's photo, who is our photo editor. And they acquiesced, and Knox like, well, you got a point, so you might as well just use Tim's photo because it is slightly better. So, I mean, but he was trying to pressure us into not running our own photo editors.
Oh man, there must have been.
And if you went back and you looked at, some publications, it's there's an 8-year stretch where every photo on the photo annual was a Burton or a Forum cover.
What was a few of your favorite covers do you remember, working on or getting to? Was a close friend of yours landing a cover or anything like that? Do you have a few photos at Snowboarder Mag that you're most proud of putting on the cover? I mean, that Austin one you just mentioned.
Yeah, that one from a pure aesthetic standpoint is an amazing one. I mean, the Kazoo cover was a great cover too, that I brought up. I mean, there's so many of them. I've also stepped back in a lot of cover conversations because I am too close to the riders in contention to get the cover. So I'll defer to Huggy or Yosh or T-Bird and all them, and I'll be like, listen, I can't be the deciding factor in this one because I've got and it's kind of a tax that some of my closer friends who ride pros, whether they realize it or not, like I step back from conversations that have to do with a lot of content involving them at times, whether or not something gets greenlit because I'm just, they're friends.
Of course.
I'm corrupt. But yeah, no, I think of one that was really cool was the first year we did Super Park at Bachelor, the backstory. So Scott Blum did an alley band tracked on this huge
I watched it.
made wall ride. Yeah. Herculean effort. No gloves.
It was so sick.
Snowmobile tow-in. It was pretty insane. Or it wasn't a snowmobile tow-in, but yeah, that one was neat because Blum didn't show up at Super Park. It's funny. So you brought up like Dustin Craven. Craven was there, and then he wanted to go rave out up at Whistler for the Whistler Ski and Snowboard Festival. Big monster event, all this stuff. So he's like trying to get a frontside invert on because everybody knew if somebody hand planted the top of this 25-foot tall wall, you're going to end up with a cover or 22-foot tall. Everybody knew it. So Scott was trying to go at it. A couple people else were trying to go at it. But Dustin the day before was like, I don't think I could get coping on it. And I'm like, I just salted this thing. We groomed it perfect. We got you sled laps. Everything we did for you today, Dustin, I'm going to do for Scott tomorrow because I want somebody to get this and get it as a cover photo. And he goes, there's no way Blum will ever get this. So I'm leaving. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to do it. And Scott had just,
Oh,
he had just gotten arrested in Mammoth the week before, wasn't supposed to leave the state of California. And, or actually, he had gotten arrested a month before, and he was supposed to, like within a week, show up at Bridgeport and do some time in the facility in Bridgeport. Um, so he snuck out of California, came up, showed up 2 days, 3 days late for Super Park. There was only 1 or 2 days left. Showed up, looked at the wall. I groomed it. We got the sled laps. You were there in like 4 or 5 tries.
it was insane.
And
There's so many. There's so many homies there too. Like the whole, yeah. Those events are fucking cool, especially when you see someone like do the thing that's supposed to be done. Like it was built for that. And I watched people hit it the whole week, and then for someone to actually get up there, you're like, oh
well,
shit.
the funny thing, and it was a lesson for Dustin, where Dustin's like, I know Dustin left and he thought I was talking shit when I was like, I'm going to do everything I did for you today because I would want Scott to get this since you're leaving, and he will get the cover. And when we got it, Dustin was sitting there up in Whistler partying, but he knew when it went down. He's like, God, son of a bitch, Pat's such an asshole. But that's how it works, and but covers beyond that, yeah, I'm a fan of the Mark Frank Montoya cover, which is his guest editor, where
Was
it's
that the tree tap?
no, he's all blinged out, standing in front of
Oh yeah, yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
limo with treads. He's got a gold plated transceiver and just, yeah, pretty, pretty cool theme cover.
I kind of love the Dustin shit talk right there. I'm a big Dustin fan. Um, a question just aside from Super Park before we dive into that, because I definitely want to touch base on that. .com era, you touched briefly on it, but like how profound of an impact did that have on magazines and brands and photographers and submissions? I feel like when that era came out, a lot of photographers were like, it just feel like it was such a big shift. And I don't know if people handled it really that well.
Problem with print is it is very budget intensive. You're not killing trees to post on Instagram. You're not having to reach, hundreds of thousands of people. You don't have to sit there and put pallets into trucks and drive them or ship them overseas. It's a very budget and labor intensive process. And because it's permanent, because it's resonant, and because there is a higher expectation for what happens with print, you do have to pay for the content, and you have to pay for the quality, which is something I've always taken pride in. Whereas I don't know if everybody in the media space really values the contributors that much, but it wasn't digital per se. I think it's social is the thing that has really broken down the barrier of entry to the point where anybody can broadcast anything. Nothing is stopping anybody from broadcasting anything, even the stuff that shouldn't be broadcast. And that's the problem with the barrier of entry. And it's a drip, 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 and that like you get desensitized to it, yeah. And it's the same with music, how much music were you exposed to because you were, granted, everybody says today you have access to more music than you've ever had before, but how much music were people exposed to because they only had one radio station in their town and they had to listen to what somebody else curated for them? Granted, the ego and self-determination aspect of humans wants them to choose stuff and create an echo chamber of your own where you just your palette and you don't have to expand it. And that's just the nature of social media, and that's wonderful. But I don't think digital as much as social has really created a upheaval. And the biggest upheaval of all is in um, how everything and creators and the culture is subsidized because of social media. On one hand, you've got people who don't have to know a Mark Sullivan to get an opportunity to have a platform and have a voice and have access to an audience. You don't need to have been in the right place at the right time, and you don't have to sit there and have somebody take a chance on you when you cold call them with a phone call, or you email them, or you send them what is called, actually ironically it's called slush submissions in magazine parlance, which is a story that is sent cold, where you just send a story to a magazine in hopes that somebody will read it and want to publish it. That's called the slush pile. But yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, anybody can have a voice and anybody could be a creator and all that stuff. And from an economy standpoint, right now, the best ROI as a brand to get your message and your products in front of, and your creative in front of people who actually buy snowboards, as opposed to people who get snowboards for free, which we're guilty of it, and plenty of snowboarding media is guilty of marketing or creating content or storytelling that is centered around entertaining people who get snowboards for free, as opposed to inspiring people who pay for snowboards. We're all in that challenge, but if you're a brand, you can spend money with Alphabet or Facebook, Alphabet, which is Google and YouTube, and then Facebook, which is Facebook and Instagram. You can spend money directly with them and check a box, and the algorithm will put your messaging in front of the people that you want to geo target. You could do all that stuff. But the problem is, I remember talking to Burton a couple of years ago, and they were talking about their direct to consumer, or it's called performance media initiatives. And I was like, yeah, that's great. But you ask us to come out here and have a photographer on the deck of that half pipe during your marquee event. How many photographers from Instagram or Facebook or Alphabet are standing on the deck of that half pipe? So it's a matter of, one, it's partially a moral conundrum, and two, it's also farm to table, keeping the dollars in the community. Um,
Big time.
that should be a thing. I mean, you look at somebody like Dave Lee and Todd Schlosser, big names in the 90s, Mac Dog, before Mac Dog filmed them, and probably while he was filming them, they worked building boards at the Mervyn factory. They were riding Alpental, they were riding wherever they were riding, but they worked in the Mervyn factory building GNUs and Libtex. And then all of a sudden, Dogger or somebody or Jamie's like, hey, do you guys want to come on a trip? I'm going to go film in Mac Dog or Barrett or whoever. And they're like, cool. And these guys got plucked out of the assembly line, out of the factory for Mervyn. And it's not, I mean, it's not unusual. JF worked for Rev up in Devon, worked for Rev, I believe, up in Vancouver and stuff. I mean, people did it. I mean, I think that's a more interesting part of where we're at right now. Is right now we're chasing the tail of opinion leaders, i.e. talented athletes and stuff, who've never bought a snowboard in their life. They don't even know what a pro form is. They went right from their parents buying their first couple snowboards to getting free snowboards. And that creates a distance from the actual reality of what it is we're all working towards here, is inspiring people to live the snowboarding life. And what subsidizes that inspiration is the notion that, along with inspiring people to live the snowboarding life, they're going to pay into the system by buying products.
Big time. I feel like you have all these photographers, you got your Blottos and your Scott Surfaces and your Ollie G's and Andy Wrights, etc., who've put their time in and stuff. And then the social media world just starts, and it's people are sharing their content, not tagging them. Or like, I couldn't imagine being a photographer from like the 90s into the 2000s who've like paid their dues into this. And you finally start getting like a good paycheck, and you can afford to keep your family afloat and pay some bills. And then before you know it, brands are like, hey, can we use your photo for an ad? We'll send you a box of gear. You're like, I have to make a, what do you mean? Like, I feel like there was a giant like slap in the face to a lot of the like most credible photographers, having worked with a lot of them and shooting with a lot of them, hearing their frustrations in the like 2012 to 2015 when social media was taking over so big, and them not knowing like at the end of a day, do I give the brand some photos, or like, how do I do this to not like devalue all photography?
I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, I think it's still to be determined.
Big
And
time.
I don't think a lot, I mean, I think there's parallels with what pro riders dealt with as influencers came in,
Same thing.
willing to do the same thing. I mean, is there a big difference between somebody who's been a pro rider for 20 years or somebody who's been a professional photographer for 20 years, Um, you think the shelf life for the pro photographer is a lot longer than the rider, but unfortunately, due to trends and technology, that wasn't necessarily the case. But I think there's a lot of pro riders too, or photographers and pro riders who who got a little bit blindsided. I mean, and it's nothing new. I mean, it happens with each generation. You got to think in 1990, you could be, well, let's fast forward to 1994 and 95. You could do like 6 contests a year, go filming for 20 days that year, shoot photos before and after the contest, this, that, and the other thing. You could be a pro snowboarder and make $60,000-$70,000 a year and only ride 50 days. And then the Forum 8 came. and they changed everything. But I mean, when you look at the old Transworlds and snowboarders in the 80s, 40% of the content was shot the day after the contest.
Oh yeah, I remember the Scott Surface photo of Devin Walsh backlipping that wood rail. It's just like Scott posted it a few years ago. He's like in between runs at the U.S. Open with Devin. It was just like just banging off his like just getting it done. And our last guest Todd Richards mentioned that in the 90s everybody had a pro model board. You show up to the trade show, and he used an example of one of his friends went to the trade show and they made up a guy who's never snowboarded in his life and got him on pro teams by just going to the trade show and telling people that their friend is the best.
For sure. I mean, and that's, yeah. I mean, and a lot of people romanticize and think that, there's a bigger corruption of the soul of it today than there's ever been, which isn't necessarily the case. You look at Transworld and Snowboarder, case in point. The origin stories of both of those magazines involve the owner walking into a boardroom with their whole staff there going, hey, raise your hand if you think we should start a snowboarding magazine. Sure enough, there's 20 people in the room, 20 people raise their hand. And then they go, cool, so we'll start a snowboarding magazine. Raise your hand if you've ever tried snowboarding. Nobody raises a hand. Well, raise your hand if you want to learn how to snowboard and start a snowboarding magazine. Both magazines were started by people who had never stepped foot on a snowboard. That's crazy to think about, and they're such important at the time, particularly, certainly at the time. I mean, it's debatable later on, but at that moment, having Transworld and Snowboarder in the 80s was, I mean, granted, ISM's probably the best of the 3 magazines at the time, but it was an independent. But having Transworld and Snowboarder, it's hard to overestimate how important they were to the growth of the sport, because they connected a community in ways that you weren't going to get from watching Greg Stump films.
Which is crazy to think that those magazines did start from that. I actually didn't even know that. I always thought that they would have started. I actually didn't know the history of Snowboarder or Transworld. It's interesting to hear that that's where it stemmed from. But how important do you think it is that I feel like the 1% in snowboarding, makes all the money, and then the middle class in snowboarding right now is just dissipating. Like you were mentioning, that there was riders making off of 50 days a year riding and riding in contests, making between $50,000 and $70,000 a year. And you had mentioned the Dust Box crew or the Mountain crew here in Canada or whatever, the Bruners on the East Coast of Canada. I mean, those kids probably make $2,000 a year, if that. It's just like there is no like middle class spotlight these days.
I've sat there and tried to wrap my head around where did the dollars go, and I think that I don't, I don't think it's entirely fair for people to think that it's the 1% of riders that are taking up the, as they say on the bomb hole. I don't know if I can say it, but the cheddar biscuit, so to speak. But and sorry, don't mean.
No. What do you mean? I'm the biggest fan of the bomb hole.
I'm like, it might be blasphemous to mention the cheddar biscuit on the airtime.
No way. What up, Chris?
You know what I'm saying? I don't think it's not the Mark McMorris's. It's not the, it's not the Travis Rices, the Jamie Andersons, the Mark McMorris's, the Danny Davises, the Pat Moores, the Lewis or, the Bodies. I don't think it's that's not it. Because the fact of the matter is most of those riders, are underpaid by their
I agree.
manufacturing sponsors. So where is the money going? I think in a lot of instances, the money is flowing vertically, which means it goes to the parent company. I mean, I just left working for Snowboarder, which 2 owners ago was owned by a private equity firm, which a lot of people in our sport are owned by private equity, or they're owned by the Chinese. Or, I mean, it is easier to count the brands that are owner operated in snowboarding than the brands that are part of a conglomerate, and that's where the dollars got to go. And the other thing is unlike pro riders, for a lot of brands, there's a cost of living increase, so if somebody's been working at a brand for 20 years and every year they get a 3% cost of living increase, it's more than a 60% pay increase over the course of 20 years for somebody who's been at that brand, because that's just the cost of living increase, which you got to understand that 3% increase. So yeah, is 3% compounded, because you get a 3% increase 1 year. Let's say you make you make 50 grand, you get a 3% increase. So you're making $51,500 the next year. The next year, that 3% increase isn't on the 50 grand, it's on the $51,500. And that doesn't even take into account any promotions that happen. So in a lot of ways, I think the dollars are just, it's a maturation of the economy of the industry. And the other thing is because because there's so much ownership change, this, that, and the other thing, a lot of it's servicing debt, meaning some of the most money that you buy a snowboard, you say you buy a snowboard for $500, $250 of that goes to the manufacturer, and of that $250 the manufacturer gets is $15 of that going to pay off the debt that the parent company acquired to buy that company. And that just straight up goes to the bankers. And that's not just snowboarding. I mean, that's a problem in America or in North America or in the world, for instance, and it's like, GNU isn't Jamie Anderson's biggest sponsor, so, LidTech, I don't think is Travis Rice's highest paying sponsor. So why is that the target, but I also think the flip side of it is, I think competitive snowboarding had its place and had its purpose as far as mainstream competitive snowboarding, but it's really got to get shook, because I think it's just become too rarefied and unrelatable for it to actually be a viable marketing outlet, which is why, a lot of people who compete in the X Games get free boards, but don't get paid to compete in the X Games by a board company or by a goggle company.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
And they shouldn't, because I don't know if they do move boards. It's a good thing though, and it's something I tried to have happen with the Do Tour for years. Is I like how natural selection um, calls out, some of the sponsors for the riders that are featured in the events and stuff. Granted, people might not know this, but every one of those brands that's
Paid money.
they paid money.
Oh, I figured, because I saw the small companies on them, like the accessory brands, like, Howl or whatever. And you're like, they're not listed, but like K2 is listed, Vans is listed. I'm like, I was wondering how much they would have to pay to get that branding, which I think is genius marketing, because you're like, oh, you affiliate like backcountry snowboarding with that rider. If you enjoy that rider, hopefully you go and buy that product. But
I was involved in our company, the parent company of Snowboarder. When I was at Snowboarder, I was involved in winning the business for the Do Tour. Flew out to the Pepsi headquarters in White Plains, presented some stuff like the team and all that, because initially some people in the conversation in our building were like, we'll base the teams on riders, or we'll base the teams on countries or regions. And I go, well, first of all, the Olympics kind of has the country thing locked up. And then I was like, the personality thing becomes a bit too dodgeball. And I was like, I thought of it as, for 5 years, I guess the company has been to produce the Do Tour. And I always thought of it as, we're like a bunch of rappers, and we're bringing everybody, all of our friends, we're bringing them with us, and that the endemics were our friends. Like, we don't want to cannibalize the opportunity for them to support the other initiatives. So just give them this initiative for free, because ultimately the promise of what was the Do Tour was an opportunity to take the tire company and car company dollars and all that stuff and funnel it into subsidizing the core, which is how I bought into it. Whether or not that happened is debatable, but it was interesting. Our company, the VP at the time, went after like Quicksilver, Volcom to be like a presenting sponsor of the Do Tour. And I'm like, you guys are crazy. Where do you think Volcom's going to get the money to become a presenting sponsor of the Do Tour? They're going to take dollars from Transworld Skateboarding, Transworld Snowboarding, Snowboarder, Surfer.
yeah,
I'm like, they're going to take the vertical
gonna,
dollars, the core dollars, and they're going to put it into this bucket. So we're just undermining what earned us the Do Tour business in the first place by eroding that subsidy that we were getting from the endemics. Whatever. It's a lot of back of the house inside baseball talk right now, but it was and that's where I was like, listen, when Todd's announcing at the Do Tour, there's no reason why you shouldn't say, you know, um, dropping in for Volcom is Scotty James or whatever.
yeah, I hope that like that. Yeah, that would be insane to be like, oh, we're not gonna voice those brands that aren't paying to be in the Do Tour and stuff. Like I like it's part of the sport.
It's nothing nefarious like that. It's nothing conscious and nefarious like that. It's just a lack of, it's having people in places that don't find value in that. Therefore, it's in one ear and out the other. They just don't, they're obtuse. They just don't get the big picture. But I mean, I remember turning to Danny Davis in the lead up to this, and I remember going to Danny. I go, all right, Danny, so in all your years of doing the X Games, how many times has an announcer said the word Burton in relation to you? And he said, never.
Weird.
And that's where I wanted to differentiate it.
That just shows that some of those events are just clueless. It's just frustrating when some of those events just run, and me, who spent my whole life like, I don't know, on the one side and not in the contest thing, sometimes I'm like, wow, this is so not tastefully done. And like it represents snowboarding, I guess, and it showcases to lots of people that snowboarding's fun, but I'm like, is it representing snowboarding in a good light? Sometimes you gotta ask yourself that, like, are they doing a good job of representing what we're about? And sometimes events just happen and they do look awesome. Like I love the natural selection, and it's important to work with those big endemic brands that do have money, that are tasteful, like Yeti. You know what I mean? I thought Yeti was a cool, relatable company that makes like legit shit for people who are actually like the outdoors. I was like, that one makes sense. But when it's like one of the like Wendy's, like or like sign up for the military, I'm like, damn, like those are kind of lame sponsors.
Well, they are lame sponsors. So there's a couple things. One, and again, back to the Do Tour, just I gotta say, they did, and do things like the team challenges and whatnot to give back. And that was one thing that I was able to bring to the table, and it happened. And that is where, you have Nitro or Solomon, whoever, bringing riders into the fold that wouldn't necessarily be showing up to compete and get their points to qualify for the Olympics. So I'm not saying it's all bad, and they're not just totally um, unreceptive to it. It's just certain things just don't. It's hard for people to understand the importance of the opportunity with certain things. But that said, so there's the Wendy's thing. Um, Wendy's is going to spend that money on marketing. They have them marketing dollars, and they're in a use it or lose it situation. So whoever their agency is, whoever's in the marketing team, if they want to spend a couple $100,000 or $1 million on an ad buy or a sponsorship of the X Games, they're going to spend that money no matter what. If they don't spend that money, they have $1 million less to spend the year after. So it's a use it or lose it situation. And if they don't spend it on the X Games, they're going to spend it on a Super Bowl commercial, or they're going to spend it someplace else. So that's worth keeping in mind. It's not so much where the dollars come, it's what they go towards. So it is what it is. And if people are motivated, somebody's going to get the dollars. Might as well be the dollars. Hopefully, ideally, would be put towards something that's more than just promoting the commerce of it all.
Okay, so when I first moved to Whistler, Whistler was like a hub, the mecca for backcountry snowboarding. Everybody, Standard, Absinthe, Burton, Videograss, everybody would be there. They're
You moved
filming.
up north.
Yeah, and they would all have new trucks.
Are you from Winnipeg?
Yeah, yeah. So all these people showed up, and you could see that they were having brands that were like paying them to like earn a living or at least a respectable income. Now all these kids move to Whistler and see all the pros. Now it's like everybody has jobs in the summer. Everyone's painting. It's like there is no longer like this dream of becoming a pro snowboarder seemed to like almost disappear, because if the kids are looking up to the pros, they're like, oh, that guy just paints in the summer and he's put his whole life into this. Not that you should be steered away from, chasing your dreams and snowboarding, because snowboarding doesn't owe you shit. Like, go and do it just because it's the best thing in the world. And it's going to bring you so much fulfillment through other ways of, filming a video part and getting paid. But there is like this lack of support, I feel like, for middle class snowboarding, where I don't know what the answer is. I just would love to see a lot over the last 5 years. I just see a lot of my friends who've spent their lives filming like amazing video parts and working their asses off. And there's no like pat on the back with like a legit sponsor at the end of the day, where I feel like in the early 2000s, 90s, it's like, yeah, you could earn a decent living, even $20,000 a year. You talk to the up and coming AMs, none of them are making 20K. And if they are, they're maybe in the Dust Box movie. And that's like where the clout is and like, the focus is. But there's like, yeah, there's the East Coast of Canada. I look at like all those Bruner kids who filmed like 7 years of video parts that are so sick. And like, they're getting like a t-shirt. It's just like, I just want those kids to get a bit of money.
Oh, you're 100% right. I mean, and snowboarding isn't alone in that. I mean, look at other industries. And I think we might need to look at other industries. I mean, and it is kind of what the Dust Box is doing by, doing their own merch and subsidizing they're creating their own brand, like
Totally.
they did with their own glove company. But you got to think the peak. What do you say? Last 5 years, it's been pretty lean. Would you say the last 5 years, or would you say the last 10 years have been lean?
No, I feel like people like I look at like when Solers really blew up and stuff like that in like 2008 to 2010, there was still like legit sponsorships. I mean, I remember when I was riding for Electric around that time, and it's like, a goggle company was paying me $600 a month, and I was like a Canadian up and coming kid. You know what I mean? Like, which is a legit contract, I would say, or at least a fair one for,
I don't get it, and that's why I bring up, like, are the dollars going elsewhere? Because I think well, certainly with the boom of the pandemic, there's more snowboarding gear being sold today.
exactly.
And it's and I know in the United States with the Icon Pass, the participation numbers are through the roof. And actually,
Same with Whistler, busier than ever.
in your world, Canada, granted, if you're in like Ontario or what was it, Ottawa, that didn't open up. But you talk to the distributors again. You guys have a bit of a different economy up there because you have to go a lot of times through a distributor to get anything. As far as the distributors have their own, they budget out their own marketing and their own team and all that. The Canadian distributors are doing very well this year, depending upon the brand. Like everybody else, there's some brands, the brands that do a majority of their business in North America had a great year. The brands that are diversified, they do a lot of business in Europe, a lot of business in Asia, a lot of business in North America. Not doing as bad as they could be. In North America offset, but Europe and Japan definitely kind of tanked for a lot of brands that had a lot of interest over there. But I think what you're talking about really is, it wasn't until sometime between 95 and 2000 that there was a wide swath of people who actually did really well.
Totally.
Like you're talking about the middle class. That middle class in snowboarding is from 95 to 2015. Let's say it's 20 years, so that means that a little more than half the lifespan of snowboarding had that sort of salad days, so to speak, that sort of subsidy that had
like a legit, I wouldn't even say like a legit pay, but you were making the same amount as somebody at McDonald's if you were like an am or a pro. You know what I mean? You were making not enough to live off of, not enough to ball out, but you could live like a snowboard bum for free.
You could live like a snowboard bum for free. And then in the summer, if you were in Whistler or you were in Banff or someplace, you'd go up on the rigs or whatever. And maybe you'd go working fishing and stuff. I mean, it's, I don't know.
Me neither.
I mean, it's not like, the mags feel it, the media outlets feel it, the filmmakers feel it, just like
photographers.
I don't know. And I don't think the shops are getting any more of it.
But what if we make like a league though? Like on hockey, there's a bare minimum for like a rookie to get signed. They're like, what if we had like a snowboard community where we all got together and it's like, if you want an am on your team, the minimum you can pay them is $300 a month. And it's like, there's just like a rate. I was just thinking about, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll start.
No, Desiree and I had a long conversation about this, and that's unionization. I mean,
unionization of snowboarders to benefit snowboarding, like the snowboard community. So if you pay your dues as a filmer, a photographer, an editor, or whoever, anyone who's like paid their dues into fucking being a part of the community respectfully, it's like, there's something in there for you, like instead of just like,
like, I mean,
I would like to reiterate that snowboarding does owe us nothing. And it's like, that you should never be doing this for a paycheck to begin with. And I don't want to sound like, follow the money, but who doesn't want to see a lot of these up and coming AMs like reach their fullest potential, who could be the next Jed or LeWiff, but like quit just a little bit early because they can't afford to eat. You know what I mean?
No, you're 100% right and everything.
A big thing is trying to balance being in the scene, and a lot of kids don't like that, like leave their friends to be in the scene, where I think they need to wrap their head around that it's not leaving your friends, it's meeting a new group of friends. And that new group of friends from the States and Salt Lake, where inevitably it's the Hollywood of snowboarding, it's like trying to make it as a musician in Winnipeg is like, you're only going to be as big as in Winnipeg in Canada. But if you move to Hollywood and you're an actor or musician, and you make it big, it's just, there's a lot more things going on there. And there's a lot more, the engine is spinning in the States. And it's always been like that. And I've always felt like if you have zero presence in the States and you have no connection and no friends there, it's tough to ever try and build a career when you don't want to be a part of the engine that's, spinning. Even E-Man and stuff like that, like the people that are like the most respected snowboarders that I know, it's like they would go to Super Park. I mean, they were friends with the whole fucking Given crew and Keegan, and it's like you have to enroll with other snowboard communities in order to like, take that next step and try and get paid too. I
I
think.
remember E-Man doing all the shakedowns when I was working with the shakedowns and all
Yeah,
that.
totally.
I would hit him up over DM trying to get some of those nollies in the snowboarder, just crickets. He would not engage. So I mean, it goes a little both ways. But to what you were saying about Canada and the United States, yeah, it's a reality, and it's not fair. The average snowboarder in Japan probably could list off, or like the kid who's like, like a you or like a me, a fan of snowboarding. The average snowboarding fan in Japan could probably list off 30 American pros or Canadian pros. But the average fan of snowboarding in America could list three Japanese pros.
Yeah, like Shuhei,
Japanese.
Kohei,
No,
Kazoo.
they won't mention Koei and they won't mention Shuei. They're gonna say Kazu.
And then
They're
be
gonna
like
say Ayuno, and they might say Taka.
Tadashi.
I don't think today they would say Tadashi, and that kills me because he's doing amazing stuff with Sims still. But yeah, no, that's just the way it is. Like kids and
Yeah, I don't know. We could talk about this forever. I think kids need to like, go out there and work your fucking ass off. And if you're the best and you have tasteful style, it'll work out anyway. Full new topic here because I feel like we could talk about this thing forever. Is Super Park. We touched base on it, but I mean, you've been enrolled in that since the beginning. How did Super Park first start, and what is Super Park to somebody who's never been?
okay, well, I wasn't involved in Super Park from the beginning. Um, I didn't get a chance to even witness Super Park with my own eyes till 1999, and they had done it in one form or the other like three times previously. Um, Super Park started in around, I think it was 1994, that Squaw Valley partnered with Sean Sullivan, um, legendary snowboarder senior photographer in the 90s and into the 2000s. But they partnered with him to build a bunch of boxes, some sort of rail slides, a couple rail slides, some jumps, a couple hips. And that was just for standard and for fall line films and Mac Dog to film and shoot photos for feature and snowboarder. And that was called the Super Park at Squaw Valley. Um, and then a couple of years later, in 1997, uh, Snowboarder went to Big White up in Canada with a guy named Mike Perillo to officially create the Snowboarder Magazine Super Park event up in Canada. And that, the mindset of Super Park was there's a lot of lawsuits, there's a lot of scary management that was still very cynical about snowboarding. And the initial boom of train parks was, hey, all these scary managers are like, hey, we can build a train park and all the snowboarders like a bug zapper, they'll just flock right to it like moths to a flame, and we could put this train park at the back of the mountain and all the snowboarders will self-segregate themselves far away from our normal clientele, out of sight, out of mind.
I've never really thought about it like that.
No,
That's so
totally.
true.
That's why you saw the early train parks pop up on trails called like barely in bounds, uh, long ways away, the outpost.
You're almost lost.
Yeah. So that's what it is. That is. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Super Park went to Big White first was in the United States, at least compared to Canada. Canada has a much more libertarian approach to like liability and stuff. It's harder to sue. I mean, there's a reason that bungee jumping started in either Canada or New Zealand or whatever. So yeah, the company at the time, is before I was working for the mag, but they approached the ski area big way and we're like, listen, can we hold a private park? We'll bring in our own train park builders. We'll bring in all the pro riders. You'll get plenty of coverage, and um, it'll be private, meaning, invite only. So we can build bigger jumps. Everybody will sign the release forms. You don't have to worry about some ticket buyer risking life and limb. And that's what the mindset was: bring in the best terrain park builders to build a park that could meet the potential of the riders, with given the limitations of existing terrain parks at that time, which were partially um, held back by, um, well, one, it was held back through two things. One, the liability side of it held back the evolution of terrain parks, because people are too afraid to build big stuff or build stuff right, because they didn't have that long leash that you could get in a private event. So it was a media event that had a magazine dedicated to it, starting at Big White in 1997. Then it moved down with Frank Wells and a couple other people building in 1998 at a resort called Dodge Ridge, which is west of Tahoe in the Sierras, small resort. And then in 1999, it went to Mammoth, which is arguably the most emblematic partner of Super Park, though, I'm sure there's people in Alberta who'd say different, people in Colorado who'd say different, people in Oregon. But yeah, we found a semi-permanent home at Mammoth in 1999 with Josh Chauvet and the Unbound crew. And that was when Super Park had grown to be over 100 riders. And, but it all still was rooted in the notion of like, can we create a platform for creating progressive terrain, which in turn will progress the riding? And there's a lot of stuff that came out of Super Park that people don't realize that is commonplace. That's become omnipresent. I mean, the first C box came out of Super Park. Step over jumps came out of Super Park with Elliot Cohn from Breckenridge, fielding the first ones of those in 2001.
Damn.
Terrain park hip stuff came out of there. The first machine cut bold transition came out of Super Park at Mammoth. A lot of other stuff behind the scenes, like a real emphasis on maintenance and how maintenance has evolved and all that stuff. A lot of it's been affected by Super Park and the notion that you maintain not for speed, but you maintain for maintenance. And then we've also had crazy instances of different things. Like one year we had a Super Park where the runway was icy, but it was 70 degrees out, but the riders still couldn't clear the jump. And we came to realize, after trying everything to try and get riders over this jump with plenty of runway, firm, crisp runway, there was a layer of water that was suctioning the riders. So they were going slow, not because the runway wasn't firm, not because it wasn't icy, because we had done what we needed to do, but because there was water that was suctioning the bases. So the only thing you could do is send a rider and have a rider shadow him and have the first rider peel out before the second rider hit the lip. There's no way you could get speed. So yeah, a lot of
That's amazing.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff came out of Super Park. Some things that didn't take off were like safety hips. Yeah.
Giant rainbow rails that were like so high in the air in battleships. I remember seeing.
Yeah,
like,
and there's photos like
that one at Lake Louise, I think, just the giant up rail.
the shark fin that
yeah, that thing was actually really sick.
Preston got his minor threat on there. I mean, some of my favorite Super Parks were up in like, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Banff. Whether it's, Jordan with Aurora and Hoodoo, or Miniki and all the
Miniki. Yeah.
I would spend a lot of time lapping and riding with obviously Dustin, but also Hardingham.
Jonas Gwynn.
Jonas. Well, Jonas I had known since 1999, if not earlier. But Jonas, yeah, have you had Jonas on the podcast yet?
I haven't had him. I need to get him on there. That guy.
You should get him on here.
Mikey posts Mikey posts a few updates of him every couple months. He's like, Jonas update.
Well, yeah. I mean, I ran with Jonas for a while. We stole a limo at the open once, and he Yeah, just like the stories about like when he was 16 having to hog tie a baby calf in downtown Calgary after it jumped out of the pickup trucks. Just shit like that is it's unbelievable. And then like him driving his truck into Trout Lake and stuff like that, and then finding all the porno mags on the dashboard when they're scuba diving to hook it up and tow it out. But he yeah, no, all those guys, whether it's Jonas, um, Kelly Skavanek, Dwayne Weeb, Ryan Hall,
Leanne Pelosi's brother was of like kind of
well,
like
Dom
Dom Pelosi.
Pelosi was amazing. So when we did Super Park at Lake Louise, there were two guys, well, a couple guys, but I remember Charles Basque, who was like one of Dom's best friends, and Dom were some of the best snowboarders in the whole train park. Dom was great because I remember the next year they were all road tripping to come down to Super Park at Keystone, and I got the call from customs like, yeah, he's not getting into the United States. And I remember when Leanne showed him, I had to take Leanne aside. I'm like, yeah, your brother got detained at the border. He's not going to be visiting America for a while. But he was an amazing snowboarder. But all of them, Chuck White, Todd.
Charles White was the last time I went to, actually no, I went to probably like 5 super parks after this, but the last time I went to Super Park with Charles was at Mammoth, when Travis was filming his first movie and Charles did a back one taipan over the jump. It's one of my most memorable super parks. I don't even know if anyone filmed it, but it was the sickest backside 180 taipan. I was a big fan of Charles White at Super Park, and Kevin Griffin was another one I liked watching there a lot.
Griff was amazing. I think yesterday was Mike Osachuk's birthday. Os was a really good one.
Yeah.
Paul Henderson was a crazy guy out of there. That zone.
TJ had a sick photo in an old snowboarder mag too.
TJ had a bunch. TJ's, I think, you talk about the shark fins. He might have had a photo on the shark fin and stuff. But I remember that Super Park you're talking about with Chuck, because Dustin did very well. That he got some clips with Travis on that.
The front 10 off the toes melon. I remember.
Yeah. And then Dustin or Chuck showed up wearing a big T-shirt with Todd Malice's face. Tall Todd's face on it, because Todd was banned from Super Park because he had poached in on an RV trip we did in New Zealand. I'm like, if you show up and go on this trip, I'm going to ban you for 2 years from Super Park. So, or I was like, you're never going to get a photo. But the friendly style. But I mean, and then there's Suderman's.
Oh yeah,
Mike and his brother.
Mike and Luke.
Yeah, no, I love Banff. But anyways, yeah, so Super Park became something I always look forward to. It was 99. I tried to go to Super Park at Dodge Ridge as a rider, and they wouldn't let me go as a rider, even though I had just had a couple articles. My first articles printed in Snowboarder, and then I had blown my knee in the US Open Big Air in 1999. So I went out there and just kind of helped out with the production of it in 99. And then 2000, I remember in 2000, I hadn't gotten my knee fixed. I was kind of a puddle, partying too much and everything. And I remember after the first day, Mark Sullivan walked up to me, my friend Evan Rose, and Joel Muzzy, who would, I worked with here and there over the years. He walks up to us and he goes, I got 3 things to say to you. 1, don't do anything near any photographers that are going to distract them from shooting any photos. 2, don't call anybody pussy that you don't know while they're in the air, which none of this really had a lot to do with me, but a little bit. And then they go, number 3, don't get any of the Mammoth employees too drunk to ride out of the park at the end of the day. And yeah, and then
different time.
Well, yeah, and then as I elevated to kind of be more in the leadership position at the mag, I haven't drank and snowboarded or drank on hills since only one day have I done it in 21 years.
Wow, good for you. You're beating me.
Sorry, 20 years since 2000 actually, 2001.
So
whatever, I blew my knee and I just didn't want to, put that. And then as far as events, it was always like, I always would have nightmares of being like, yeah, I just knew, it's the thing to do. And it's I don't know if people would ever realize that.
what was the most memorable super park for you that you thought that like was one of the most progressive like when you were there, you're like, holy shit, things are going off right now, and this riders and like they're killing it.
I was there in '99 when two things happened. People talk about, and I was there for it. Kurt Wastel hitting a 116-foot jump, which
I
kind of,
posted it, yeah, the other day. Back three,
yeah,
huge.
that one was really interesting. And I had just blown my knee, so I kind of, was looking at it, and I kind of knew. So he's goofy foot, so he's getting towed by a snowmobile, and he's goofy foot, so he's got to throw the rope, go for a heel side turn into that thing. And then because it's a back three, he's got to go from the right hand heel side turn onto his toe edge. So that was a little bit of that's how I looked at it. And I was like, it's not just 116 feet that he did. It's the fact that he had to get towed in. He had to get towed in, then carve heels, and then rotate to the toe edge.
A nightmare. I
And
would
then
never want to do that.
And then he had too much hang time because nobody knows, you don't really have an innate hang time. So he does a little frontside shifty before pulling it back on the landing. I was fast. I saw that. But the day before, which was arguably even bigger jump, though it wasn't celebrated as such, was when, there's this hip. It's a goofy backside hip, rider's right, that you could table, which a lot of tabletops hips you could table back then. And this has happened plenty of times since, and certainly happened the next day with Kurt Wastel. But you've got 70 pro snowboarders being reminded that they're fans of pro snowboarding. So you've got everybody from Bjorn to JP to Big Mountain Jeremy Jones to Sean Johnson, Sean Kearns. You got Tara Nikitas, you got Kevin Jones, you got Jussi Oksanen, you got Chad Otterstrom, everybody just sitting there on this facing hip bank or facing wall, slope, amphitheater style, sitting there watching Peter Line sled lap and do these 114-foot backside 180s methods. And it's a demo. It's like being at a demo, except the people that you're demoing for are your peers, and they're all pro snowboarders. And you saw that, when you were at Super Park and Travis is flying, and you got Lonnie Kauk and Chalone and Pat Moore and Breezy and Lego and all these guys, Dustin hitting the big jump, while you've got 200 pro snowboarders and you got 40 tripods sitting there, sniping this
Oh
thing.
yeah.
But everybody just sits down, barbecues, and goes, all right.
I watched Sketchy D get absolutely annihilated on one of those jumps, like switch backside 180, over rotated to back 270, butt check at the bottom. I was like, oh. And then Heldor and Jeeves went after, and they both overshot right after him.
Well, I think anecdotally, I think Sketchy was following 12-year-old Kyle Mack into that jump. And I think it was the centipede, which we called it the centipede because it had 100 feet. But yeah, I mean, I'd say Super Park 21 was the next. I mean, there's been a lot in the middle, like every hip session, whether it's Ben Ferg or whoever, has always been one of those. Watching Hans Nils come up in Super Park and just destroy it, aka. And then I watched Travis become ascendant in 2001 with the back one and later the back rodeo. But I think Super Park 21, which was the last one we had at Mammoth, which was huge. Watching the hip session or watching those jumps. I mean, it's crazy that, we would build these jumps. One of them had 3.5 seconds of hang time. Not a ton of distance, but it sent you high and it sent you pretty far. I mean, there's been bigger, like the Maj Johnson jumps and stuff, but 3.5 seconds of hang time is a lot of hang time.
That's
one Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, half. Like, you could do a lot when you're wound up in that. And I remember that was sort of the pinnacle of the era where people are like, I was like, make the jumps, make the landing steeper, make the jump steeper. I'm like, why send people around the world when you could send them to the moon? Because when you have the hang time, one, it displaces the amount of hazard zone because you're losing your energy going up. And you can make it to the landing because you'll just not go as high, but you'll still gravity in the fall line will still take you over to the landing. But the thought is the more pop you have, the more you unweight, and the more you unweight, the more English you can put on your trick and the more style you can have. And, nothing looks as good as a skimmer as, the distance in a straight vertical drop from where somebody is above the ground. But we would do these shoots where it's like, okay, that jump's too big. That even for Super Park, we can't just let anybody have at it. And we did good because Super Park evolved. Two things happened. One, we built a lot of lappable features because I realized after the first year of Lake Louise, nobody, no pro wants to travel all the way to something, and just because they're not feeling it that day, they still want to ride. They just don't want to hit the 80 footer or the 90 footer or whatever.
Totally.
We built a lot of lappable features. And then the other thing is the stuff that we did want to shoot that was consequential, it had evolved to the point where it was so consequential that you knew if you couldn't hang. You were like, it wasn't like somebody had to tell people, like, like the gap hip with Tomoki and the one that last Super Park 21 that Haldor and Sebedebak and Brock and Toby Miller opened up. So you just knew you had a cat wide gap on a 2-story takeoff to a hip, and you're just like, yeah, I'm good.
What respect you have to have for the guinea pigs of those jumps. I remember when I was a kid growing up, Kevin Griffin, I just did an episode with, and we were talking about not podcasts, Super Park. He would just say like how intimidating the jumps were, but if you ride Black Park every day and you just tell yourself when you're riding up to those jumps that you're not a sketch, good pop, don't drift. And he kept telling me that you can't drift. He's like, once the jump gets over 50 feet and you don't have a good backside spin and you can't hold your edge, like you will die. Like you'll hit a tree or like a photographer or filmer. And the first year I went was that Mammoth year. And there was, I don't know, that one jump that I feel like it was Sage Kotzenberg's first year. It was hitting it with Dustin, and they had the helicopter out and stuff. And Nash and Kale Hill were hitting the jump.
Nash, that's your names.
And they had the 2 groomers on top. And I remember being like, you can't just drift left or right, because if you deck, you're gonna blow your knee really badly. Like
that was a bit of a waterfall hit and a long runway. I hate long runways, but the landing was big, and that one
was super big. Jamie Anderson to me was standout that year. She back 180'd and then went into a cab 5 on the next jump, and it was just salted. It was insane.
But she also did a cab 5 to front 5 in the combo. But the other person who hit that day was Kimmy.
Oh, sick.
Fasani looked that up. A lot of people did. That was a good one. That was a nice waterfall. That was a great setup. But it had a long runway. But yeah, the Albertans used to come down and Guinea stuff. And
Hardingham would just jump into the woods.
Well, he did that at Keystone, which was phenomenal. I mean, that was an interesting one because photographers and filmers were they were divided on that one. You had a camp that was like, all right, I'm not going to film this. I'm not going to photograph. I can't film somebody who I think is going to die doing what they're doing. And then the other people were like, fuck it. I don't think Hardingham's going to die. And then but yeah. And I remember being there a couple years later for the launch, and Tyler Flanagan and Zach Hale are standing there for the launch. They're like, you remember when Hardingham launched into the trees down there, and the ski patrol standing behind us and goes, I was here for that. I remember that. It was awesome. And that's just really funny. But no, Hardingham used to Guinea a lot of stuff, but Hardingham and Dustin also, I remember one year, like somehow figured out a way to like tiptoe onto the knuckle, and then they strapped in and left 2 riding tracks and pretended like claiming it, like riding away and stuff, so that there were 2 tracks coming out on that one centipede jump, so that they tried to make people think that they had guineaed it, and they did.
Who is the Super Park GOAT in your eyes? Who went to Super Park the longest and just was the standout for the most consecutive amount of years?
I mean, it's hard not to say that Travis was the Super Park GOAT.
Sick.
Because he just came in and did, but people have done similar stuff, but it wasn't the first year in 2001 that he got standout. That was his breakout year, but he did. It was the next year, 2002 at Breckenridge, that he just showed up 2 days later, and there's a lot of stuff that people had looked at for 2 days and hadn't tried, and he pretty much checked everything off the list within like 4 runs and was out. he was a big one. I mean, Haldor kind of did the same thing in Super
Yeah.
Park 21, and then Pat probably did the biggest Iron Man thing at the second year at Keystone. I remember we went up a couple days before, the day before, as the riders were finishing it up. And this is the most jock thing I've ever heard anybody say in the history of snowboarding. And Pat texted me about 20 minutes ago, and he's gonna cringe when I say this, but after showing him the park, we went up, then we went down and we were grabbing like a chowder bowl or something. And Pat turns to me and goes, "For the next 4 days, I'm going to go from photographer to photographer, filmer to filmer, feature to feature, and I will get the best clips and photos on each feature."
Yes.
And I go, "What did you just say?" He's like, "I will get the best photos and clips in this park over the next 4 days. That is what I expect of myself from this super park." And I'm like, "Oh my God." And
That's
then I
kind of
was,
sick. I'm
like,
down.
"What is it?" But he did. He absolutely did. That was when he was doing the McTwist to Fakie and stuff like that, coming off the Arctic Challenge. Had just gotten his first pro model
For
with
him.
with the yellow base and the plaid. What is it called, teak or whatever type of plaid it is. But anyway, so yeah, no, I can't. I mean, Dustin always clipped up. Hardingham probably brought the most energy to Super Park for a while, but I gotta say Rice kind of, and he's very gracious with the, remember, bringing up and acknowledging Super Park's role in his arc and stuff. Yeah.
Those are fond memories of me going to those. And I definitely saw when I first went, it was like the first year where they had like a roller section and a few funner things, more fun. And then it really transitioned over the course of the 5 years that I went. The last few years, it was just like there was a section for the people that just wanted to come to Super Park to celebrate that the end of the season was here.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like, I was like, it went from being this like really serious event to this event that I just could not wait to just go and see all the friends I haven't seen in a year because everyone's been filming and stuff. It was a great way to get everyone together.
Yeah, that's awesome that you bring that up, because without like a trade show happening in Vegas and stuff, which is where a lot of people met for the first time, you didn't have it. I mean, in 1991, you would go to the US Open and you see Kevin Young and Devin Walsh and Browner, and you'd see everybody in the world of snowboarding would go to the US Open in Vermont, Daniel Frank, Terrier, whoever, because there weren't a lot of those things. So it brought the whole tribe together. And then Vegas used to do that. And then it kind of got splintered out. And then Super Park turned into that thing, because I mean, everything's so fragmented, where you got your contest kids, you got your rail kids, you got your free riders, and, you know, and then you've got your individual film crews where you're pretty much just strapping in alongside 5 kids for the whole, or 5 friends for the whole season. So what is that thing that's going to bring everybody together to commingle, ride alongside each other, and even for team managers and filmers to be like, "Oh, who is that kid? I want to pick that kid up," or whatever. And then we always would get, um, people would be like, "Okay, so I don't, if this isn't a contest, I don't have to sit there and only have 2 runs, show up, blow it, whatever, this, that, or the other thing." And you'd have certain riders, like you brought up Kevin Griffin, or we bring up Paul Anderson and Noah Suchuk, or even, Dustin and all them. We started to get this little like clique of riders who would just really kind of peak during Super Park, or the only time you
Well,
ever saw
it
them
gave
was
spotlight to people who weren't in. And when Super Park was really blowing up to me, it was like you had your Mac Dogs, your standard, you had your big films, and then other than those, there was no real way to get into those films unless you were already like in Salt Lake and stuff. And it was just such a good way for the up and coming kids like Kevin Griffin to go there and showcase like, hey, I can hang. And it really showcased Super Park to me, really showed, because being a professional snowboarder doesn't mean shit. And then when you go to Super Park, you can see the people who are like pro snowboard. Like they go off the jump, they go and do a front 3, they don't drift, they pop. Like watching Pat Moore ride through when I would say Pat was at his peak riding park jumps. Like I got to witness all that or see Heldor and Andrew Jeeves and the young and Torstein and stuff like that when they were.
Lonnie Kell.
Oh, Lonnie Cock too. That DC young kid era in like 2010 was fun. Those kids were so sick to all watch train jumps because they were like the first young kids who were just keen to go massive, and there was no drifting. You go switchback 5, the line was completely straight off the takeoff, like fucking so fun to watch.
Hardingham would drift.
I know, it's switchback 7 I saw.
You brought up TJ. People don't. I've been thinking about TJ a lot lately. Schneider. He was what a good dude.
Yeah.
You know what? I stayed at his place though. He had a snake. Not a fan of people who have not a fan of the part of people's lives that makes them embrace getting a snake.
A reptile in their house. No.
Yeah, I could not get out of there fast enough.
So you've transitioned into leaving Snowboarder Magazine and starting a new magazine. Are you guys going to be doing print? What is Slush Magazine going to be up to? Are you guys going to make a new super park? Give us a little insight into this new chapter.
Okay, well, yeah. So on January 4th, I resigned from Snowboarder after 21 years, almost to the day. And it, yeah, I mean, I could have stayed and stuff, but I mean, nothing, what led to that circumstance isn't anything that has to do with the industry or has to do with my staff or has to do with the health of Snowboarder, but it's ultimately the company that owns us just didn't weather COVID very well, and they took a broad brush approach to we're compartmentalized as like Transworld Skateboarding, Snowboarder, Powder, all these magazines. And as healthy as Snowboarder was, you're only as healthy as your weakest sister publication, so to speak. For me, the notion was I've been doing this long enough. I've had to rebuild Snowboarder on multiple occasions. I've had to weather a lot of media trends, and I've had to figure out how to, create a new media model despite the democratization of social media and the digital landscape. And there's a big Rolodex, a lot of relationships, a lot of experience that between myself and my colleagues that we could bring to bear on something independent. And ultimately I was like, if I don't try it, it's something I think I would regret forever.
I love it. Psyched.
Well, there's a lot of advantages too. I mean, for the last 5-6 years, Snowboarder's been tethered and hasn't really had its own control of its own destiny because it's part of a conglomerate. And to that end, a lot of my bandwidth was spent, 30% of my bandwidth for the last 5 years was spent trying to rationalize and justify something internally to people who had a seat at the table, or ultimately it was I had to go through and get their sign off on stuff. And, that's a very fatiguing and exhausting thing, particularly when you're trying to sell stuff internally before it goes to the audience or even the advertisers, and you're trying to get people to buy into a notion, yet they're not regular foot, they're not goofy foot, they're only driven by the bottom line, not the line to the bottom. So anyway, yeah, I we had some things in place that were able to give us a foundation, and it actually also created an opportunity for us to recalibrate some accepted norms of the whole paradigm, and like even a lot of back end stuff or even some front end stuff, and without having to sit there and carry the water for any other titles, we're actually able to be for a while there when I was at Snowboarder, some of the ad dollars were paying not to, if you're an advertiser with Snowboarder, some of that money that you're paying for advertising wasn't necessarily just going to support the Snowboarder staff or the contributors, which 50 cents of every dollar did up until the end. I mean, some percentage of each ad buy went to pay the salaries of Transworld Skate. That's tough. And now we don't have that burden. you know. So we were able to sit there and we launched Slush Awards. It's called Slush Magazine, and the notion with Slush and the name is, one, it's a bit irreverent, it's not pristine, it's not perfect, just like the side of snowboarding that we want to portray, but it's a lot of fun. Slush isn't pristine, it's not perfect, but it's arguably the most fun type of snow for the largest group of people. You know, if you're going to go to the mountain and you're going to expect slush, you're not going to have to put on tire chains. You're probably not going to need a first layer. As a matter of fact, you probably don't want a first layer, because if you're going to, fall in the slush, you don't want to get wet to the bone. But yeah, so we started with the award show. We have social media. We have a lot of it. It's not taking the exact formula of snowboarder, but some of the learnings, like the learnings of modern media. We talked about digital, social, all this. Uh, Print's an important part of Slush, but it's not the only part of Slush. We have social, we have digital, we have events, we have video, and we have print. There's 5 different buckets, and then we have merch over here, which comes under reader support, which reader support is a hedge against advertising. Reader support falls under merch, which we do merch programs that benefit charities through the Correlation Initiative. Just picked up a bunch of t-shirts for the next episode of Correlation with Eric Leon, which benefits a charity. And then
Is Snowboarder Mag still around, or is it
Snowboarder
still
is
going?
very much still around.
Who
For
runs that then? Like, who's behind Snowboarder Mag now?
Well, there's somebody in there doing social, and there's somebody in there.
Because I see them still posting, but it's like, to me, the soul of Snowboarder Mag, and you were a big part of that. And the reason why I think that magazine had a lot of respect is because you have a lot of respect from being in the community for so long, and you're just a fucking awesome human. So when you left and I never figured out who took your place, whenever I see Snowboarder post, I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Well, I mean, listen, Snowboarder speaks. Snowboarder has the biggest audience of people who actually ride, not sponsored riders and pro riders, actually, and photographers and filmers. Yeah, they actually snowboard. But as far as the average snowboarder out there, that is the biggest audience in the history of snowboarding, is reached via Snowboarder Magazine in 2021. And there's still value there. There's still people there. The machine's still, it's not the same, but they're doing what they can.
So Slush Magazine, who else is there other than you? And is this
Uh,
something that you actually own, or is it owned by somebody else, or is this Pat Bridges' fucking
it's
passion?
mine. It's mine. Nobody has any equity except for myself.
Fuck, sick. Check out Slush Magazine, everyone. That's dope.
You can go to slushmag.com, but officially the URL is slushthemagazine.com. You can go to slushsnowboarding.com, at Slush the Magazine on Instagram. But yeah, no, it's the video magazine is directed, edited, and produced by Justin Meyer of Videograss fame, and we've put out 2 episodes there.
They were so sick, by the way. I was grateful to have a clip. Thanks, Justin, for hitting me up.
There you go. Keep them coming. Ted is the director of video. Then we have Mary Walsh as a key contributor.
Sick.
On the fold, we have a guy named Kyle Sauter. Worked for Rome, JDK, a bunch of people, 10 Barrel. He is our art director. We have Mike Goodwin, which people might know. Mike ran Method Magazine. He is our digital director. We have Max Tokunaga as our director of social. And then we have Scott Keating, who's our sales director. And then Stan Levier is our editorial director. And then Mark Clavin is our photo editor.
So you guys have a bunch of snowboarders working at a snowboard magazine. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, well, we're still, we're in startup mode and growing. If we don't have to sit there and the dollars aren't flowing horizontal or flowing vertical, we could I think the industry really, and the riders and the audience and the readers, I think they really like the authenticity of actually having actual snowboarders telling them something about what they can relate to, what they can't relate to, this, that, and the other thing. That's pretty unique. I mean, granted, there's sacrifices involved in being in any job, and that's something that's lost on some people. But this is a very is a kind of an all-star team of amazing, experienced, creative individuals.
You guys are gonna make a like a super park kind of thing, like where you get together a big group of people in the future? Or is that in the cards?
That's a lot of people want something like that. I think the gathering is the real get there. I
Yeah,
don't think
the gap. It
the get is the, the two-story takeoff so much, but I think it's given everybody a singular purpose and stuff. This would have been the year to do it, because getting everybody together without having to worry about Canadians would have been all time. Nothing out there.
yeah, no Japanese people, no Canadians, no Euros, no Australians. The perfect year.
That's it. We'll call it Trump.
Finally the world's best, all the Americans.
I know, and I have some stuff rolling out in the fall. We do have 4 issues. It's October, November, December, January. You can go to our Instagram at Slush The Magazine, and in the bio, you can, check out what we got going for subscriptions, and maybe pick one up. And also underneath the Instagram, we also have side surfers, we have stickers, we have t-shirts, we have water bottles, got a slew of merch, a bunch of, old stock DVDs, stuff to check out.
Sick.
We did sell out of the Heroes book yesterday, which is great. I might have to hit up Jerome and buy some more copies, but
That's amazing. Well, thanks for jumping into this new chapter, Pat. It's much needed in snowboarding, and there's no better person to start a magazine. Seriously.
well, yeah, and Mag is, I'm not, it's the outlet for Stan. I mean, yeah, he'll lean on me. I'll give him some, help him, enable him, and give him some advice here and there as needed. But he, same thing. Myers, the mastermind behind the video mag. I'm just sitting there trying to work on the back end and give people the tools to, in the platform to do what they do best.
And
Cool.
Justin does that best.
do you
Justin is phenomenal for snowboarding. I have like a fire round questions for you before I
Okay.
get to so these are just quick. You don't have to think of that too long. Whatever pops into your head. You might regret some of these answers later, but I feel like for the most part you'll be able to just
They're like, what's the worst song on the Doors album, Over Your Shoulder? I would say I would say Crystal Ships is probably the worst song on that album.
yeah, well, the best is the end.
You're correct there.
Okay, best style.
Best style in snowboarding of all time or currently?
Both. Let's all time and currently.
I'd say currently Louis.
Sick.
And then of all time, best style in snowboarding of all time that people know. Someone people know. I'll say Danny. They'll just whatever.
Danny Cass.
Yep.
Love it. So sick. All right. Favorite board graphic.
Okay, Travis Kennedy Tech 9 board. It's some things I can't get into the details, but there you got 2 powder wolves with Mac 10s. You got Reno in the background, all frozen over. There's an igloo. There's some cartoons of popping bottles here and there. I think that's an amazing lowbrow graphic.
I missed that, homie.
All on it, and I think I think Doman did the graphic. It's amazing. Lane Kanak had a pro model that had a pretty insane graphic too. It involved some black light and stuff. That was a great one. Yeah, those are the ones.
Good picks. Most underrated snowboarder.
Okay, currently or ever?
Well, we could do both. I like the both.
Okay. This is a tough one. Do I get a pass?
Yeah, you could have a pass.
Well, I already went on the record with this in the last issue of Snowboarder I was writing, and that I think Zach Hale might be the most underrated rider.
Whoa, sick. He's been in the spotlight for so long, so I wouldn't consider him like underrated. But I do think his him and Burton breaking up has made Zach Hale. I love his new snowboarding, and I think that he works so fucking hard. And his snowboarding has gotten better and better.
I mean, there's a lot of people. I mean, Krugs is pretty insane in front of anything you put in front of him. Jared Elston's pretty insane.
All right. Snowboard crush.
For what? Girls?
Yeah, or guys, whatever you're into.
Right. Well, if it's girls, I'd say Victoria Juleus.
Same.
Guys, uh, Travis.
Nice. Snowboard movie you watched the most.
All right, either decade or, well, when you go on tour for movies, when you make a movie, and I've made about, a little over a dozen. Okay, recently I'd say Beacon is one because we toured that one.
That movie's awesome. Hayden did a great job on that.
Hayden did insane with that one, and it's funny. Yeah, it's really, yeah, it's amazing. But I'd say Decade or The Garden. And then yeah. Oh, Project 6 is another one too.
Favorite snowboard brand.
Snowboard brand, my favorite snowboard brand, current, like live or not live?
We could do one of each again.
Currently my favorite snowboard brand currently. I think I got a pat. I can't think of.
Slush Magazine, dude.
All right, Goon Gear.
Goon Gear. So sick. Favorite era of snowboarding.
You got to say the 90s just because the expectation was to not take it too seriously, and it wasn't really hard to get taken care of. Even the business was like, you let it slide. This is snowboarding. They do business a little different in snowboarding. And it wasn't so much as you could be a jackass and you didn't have to worry about somebody behind you with a camera putting you on blast right away, and also, I mean, before 2008, 2009, I mean, photographers, you get photographers on here, they'll talk about it too, but writers, photographers, even riders to an extent and stuff. Once the sun went down in 2008, it was out of sight, out of mind, like Blotto in 2007 or 2006 would take all of his film at the end of the day, stick it in a bag, a secure bag, put it in the freezer till he got it out for developing in April. There wasn't any of this 3 hours of processing, keywording, changing the levels. And the same thing with filmers. You weren't sitting there, cataloging all your clips for the day, wiping your cards, wiping the P2, whatever. You just, I mean, there is a different set of stress with light leaks. You could have filmed for 2 months with a light leak in your camera and you got nothing to show for it at the end of the year with the 16 or the 8. But it just seemed like the internet just created a lot more work without a lot more return. And so, yeah, I mean, that era was pretty for professionally, like personally, the 90s, but professionally, the first decade of the new millennium was just like, I would snowboard all winter long, go on a couple of trips. I didn't have to pick up a pen till April or May and start writing. It was amazing. I didn't have to put up a caption or a post immediately that day. And the same with photographers and filmers. So
sick. Favorite resort.
I gotta say Mammoth. If it's not snowing, it's sunny. I mean, yeah, it's windy, but it's like, I don't know. It's like there were years where I was more a resident of Mammoth, even though I collected my mail in SoCal. So it's got a place for me, and it was very formative in my rehabbing of my knee and getting back into it. So
worst trend.
Worst trend in snowboarding? Rolling the pants up above the cut of the boots. I still stick.
I was actually hoping you would say that.
Still stick to that one.
Who is the GOAT?
Greatest of all time? I'd say Travis. And I have a different take on it than, because I saw some stuff even before I saw him emerge in 2001 at Super Park. Like, I announced a U.S. national half pipe event where Travis did a double back in the pipe. In 2005, in the lead up to the Torino Olympics, there was in December, we were at Breckenridge for the Olympic qualifier. There was a qualifier to get into the finals of that first Olympic qualifying event. Travis got third in the qualifiers leading into the finals, which means as of that very first competitive element of the road to get to the Olympics. He was clearly in a position to make the Olympic team for half pipe in 2006. And then if you look at the old grenade films, he won rail jams, but he also got rail clips in the streets. I mean, Lord, we all know what he can do in the backcountry and stuff. And then at that era, everybody knew what he could do because he won the X Games slopestyle. I mean, nobody is as much of a multi-threat as Travis ever. And now here we are, 20 years. He's had a career. He's been recognized as, more often than not, as the best rider on earth for 20 years.
Yeah, my thing is that he is so far ahead in the backcountry. Like, and now that I've devoted the last segment of my life to riding backcountry, and I do ride with some of the world's best, like Rasman and stuff like that, and seeing, Stollers' video parts and Renzi's video parts and people who've filmed like the best. Travis can do stuff that requires a level of calculation and skill mixed with every single ability you need to have in the backcountry and ride terrain that is unrideable to most people. I have like a 5-minute segment of riding line. You're like, how did you navigate down that line and find yourself? It's sloughed at this point. Like, I'm like, it's sloughed. How did he figure out how to just go left there? And if he goes one ridge over too far, it's like, that's the ridge you can't be on or you die. And he does, like,
yeah, but also Travis,
yeah.
Travis rode in the backcountry and he took filming. For a stretch there, he was doing everything else at the same time. But like, had Travis sat there and not gone to the backcountry, Andreas, all these, it's arguable that he would have stayed in slopestyle up until the ascendance of Seb and Mark and all those guys, but he would have. There's definitely trophies in Andreas's Vegas trophy case, or even UC Oxon and its trophy case, that would not be there had Travis stayed in slopestyle. And then you look at half pipe, had Travis kept competing in pipe, there's trophies in Danny Cass and trophies in Sean White's trophy case that would not be there had Travis chosen to go down that route. And then you look at, people like, who were at the top of jibbing in like 2005, 2006, people like Simone Chamberlain or Mike Casanova, or people like that. Had he gone down that road, and because you look at the old grenade films, he was stacking jib clips, they wouldn't have been as regarded as they were in that era. But he just happened to choose the backcountry. And he stood next to John Jackson and went up to him. He stood next to Giggy, stood next to Nicholas, stood next to Davids. We all know the greatness that came out of the collaboration with Ramon that culminated with Chad's Gap and the Pyramid Gaps and stuff. It's like, yes, Terry is highly influential. He's probably more dynamic, slightly more naturally talented. Maybe not. I just don't know who else would be in the conversation. And then there's the side of it. Nobody has sat there and tried to make a mark off hill that is more resonant and altruistically positive with elevating not only the sport, but his peers than Travis, whether it's through natural selection, whether it's through opening up the opportunity and the exposure for fourth phase, that's it, that's all, the art of flight. Nobody. Yeah, you'd be in an ultra natural and supernatural. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's that complete package with that sort of how prolific and the longevity that he's had.
What a great answer. All right.
Dude, I can't believe we've been on this ship for almost 3 hours now.
Really?
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, totally. I'll thanks for coming on. You're the man.
No, thank you. For a while, and you're very kind and nice, and I'm stoked on this. I was a big fan of listening to like Marie and everybody else on it. And as far as people at home, keep reading between the lines.
Word. Thanks again, Pat. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jody.
Peace.